We hear this number all the time in climate discussions, right? 1.5 degrees Celsius. But what does it really mean? Today, we're going to dig into the hard data and see for ourselves the massive difference between a world that warms by 1.5 degrees and one that warms by 2. Let's get into it. So let's start with this really important statement from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. This isn't some far-off prediction. It's happening right now. The effects are already here. That's the reality we're dealing with. And that brings us to the big question. 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees. I mean, it's only half a degree. You wouldn't even notice that walking outside. But when we're talking about the entire planet, what's the big deal? Is it just a small tweak, or is it the difference between a future we can handle and one that's, well, a catastrophe? All right, to really answer that, let's look at two completely different futures, using the projections from the world's best climate scientists. And you're going to see that half a degree, it's not a small change at all. It is literally a world of difference. Let's start at the very top of the world, in the Arctic. Now, this place is basically the planet's air conditioner. It's that important. And as we're about to see, it is incredibly sensitive to even the tiniest changes in temperature. Now look at this. This is where it gets crazy. At 1.5 degrees of warming, an Arctic summer with no sea ice is something that would basically never happen in our lifetimes, a once-in-a-century event. But bump that up to 2 degrees, suddenly it's happening once every decade. That's a 10-fold increase. And it's not just the ice on the water. Check out this number. 2 million square kilometers. That is the amount of permafrost, that permanently frozen ground that we could prevent from thawing if we just hold the line at 1.5 degrees instead of 2. And to put that into perspective for you, that's an area roughly the size of Mexico. Okay, so let's travel from the freezing Arctic all the way down to the warm tropical oceans. People call coral reefs the rainforests of the sea, and for good reason. They are these incredible, bustling underwater cities that are just essential for marine life and for all the people who live on the coasts. Take a good look at this number, over 99%. It's just a staggering figure. What on earth could that be referring to? And here's where that number comes from, and boy, it is a gut punch. At 1.5 degrees, we're already looking at losing 70 to 90% of our coral reefs. I mean, that's already devastating. But at 2 degrees, it jumps to over 99%. So let's be really clear, that extra half a degree is the difference between having a severely damaged ecosystem and the functional extinction of coral reefs across the entire planet. And the story is just as dramatic when we look at life on land. For so many species, a warmer world is a smaller world. The climate they've adapted to literally starts to disappear, pushing them into smaller and smaller areas just to survive. This table here shows the share of species that are projected to lose over half of their natural home. Now, at 1.5 degrees, the numbers are already worrying, but look what happens when you jump to 2 degrees. For plants and vertebrates, the number of affected species doubles. And for insects, the pollinators that our entire food system relies on, it triples. That is just an enormous leap in risk for just half a degree more warming. So let's scale this up and look at the whole planet. This chart shows us how much of the Earth's land is expected to completely change. We're talking about a forest turning into a grassland. At 1.5 degrees, that's about 6.5% of all land. But at 2 degrees, it doubles to 13%. There it is again, that doubling effect. That tiny half degree is having this massive amplifying impact. So why does all this matter so much? I mean, who cares if a forest turns into a savanna? Well, because we live here. We are completely dependent on these ecosystems. The fallout from these changes doesn't just stop with the plants and animals. It ripples directly into our lives, into our society. As these ecosystems start to break down, the risks to all of us just skyrocket. At 2 degrees, we're looking at much bigger threats to our food supply as crops fail and fisheries collapse. Water becomes harder to find. Our health is at greater risk. And economies that depend on a stable climate, well, they face some serious trouble. I know this IPCC chart looks a little complicated, but stick with me, because it tells a really clear story. Just focus on that first bar on the left, the one for fragile systems like the Arctic and coral reefs. See how the color flips from red, which means high risk, to purple for very high risk, and notice where it flips, right in that tiny little window between 1.5 and 2 degrees. That's the tipping point, right there on the screen. Okay, so the data is pretty undeniable, right? That half a degree is everything. So the next logical question is, what does it actually take to stay on that 1.5-degree path? And this quote from the IPCC just nails it. I love the wording here. It's not impossible, so okay, there's a little bit of hope there, but it requires unprecedented transitions. That really tells you just how huge the challenge in front of us is. And it's not just the scientists saying this. You have analysis from places like McKinsey concluding that, yes, decarbonizing our world is technically achievable. We have the technology. But as they put it, the math is daunting. The speed and the scale of change that we need is unlike anything humanity has ever attempted before. So what does this journey even look like? Well, in a nutshell, it's a massive, coordinated effort to get carbon out of every single part of our economy. It means investing huge amounts in infrastructure that can withstand a changing climate. But here's the thing the sources make really clear. This isn't just a cost. This transition is also one of the biggest economic and job-creating opportunities of our time. So this is where we're left. The science has drawn a very clear line in the sand at 1.5 degrees. It's shown us that half a degree isn't just a number, it's the difference between a damaged world and a broken one. We know the path to avoid that future is incredibly difficult, but we also know it's possible. Which leaves all of us with one final big question to think about. What happens next?